Not your average tabletop. Woohoo!
Welcome to Not Your Average Tabletop. I'm Zach, and for today's rules recipe, we're going to be looking at the Downfall of Pompeii. The ingredients that make up the Downfall of Pompeii are various Pompeii cards, player pieces of 4 different colors, a tile bag along with the lava tiles, a game board, and also a volcano. To set up the Downfall of Pompeii, you'll first want to give each player a specific set of one-colored game pieces. If it's a 4-player game, each player will only get 25 of the 30 total game pieces, so take away 5 pieces for each player. Then, one of the most important parts of setup is to prepare the draw deck. At the beginning of the game, you'll want to make sure to separate all of the 7 omen cards, the 2 AD 79 cards, and then the remainder of the rest of the cards. Then for now you'll want to set aside the Omen and the AD 79 cards. Then you'll want to shuffle the Pompeii cards and deal out 7 sets of 4 cards each. Ignore these 7 sets of cards for now, and then shuffle together the remaining 25 Pompeii cards along with the 7 Omen cards together. Then, after you have these shuffled together, depending on the player count, you'll have to draw out either 10 cards for a 4-player game or 15 cards for a 2 to 3-player game into a pile of their own. Once you draw the appropriate number of Pompeii and Omen cards, shuffle one of the AD 79 cards into this deck. Once this has been shuffled in, place the remaining pile of 22 or 17 cards, depending on the player count, on top of the cards with the AD 79 card shuffled in. Then place the second AD 79 card on top of that. Lastly, you'll place 2 of the 4 card piles from the earlier step on top of the AD 79 card. The deck is now ready, and from top to bottom it should be 8 Pompeii cards, an AD 79 card, and 25 Pompeii cards with 7 Omen cards shuffled in and the other AD 79 card added in as well. Then each player also receives one of the remaining 4 card piles from the earlier step as their starting hand. Without looking at them, place any unused 4 card piles back into the box. Do not use them during this game. After this, what you'll want to do is assemble the volcano to be placed inside the board. Then place it in the open circle on the top of the board. Then make sure the game board on the table is within easy reach of all players. The last thing you'll need to do is place all of the lava tiles into the bag and shake it up. The game, The Downfall of Pompeii, will be played over 2 phases. The first phase will be new citizens move into Pompeii, and the second phase will be run for your lives. On your turn during the first phase of the game, you will take 3 actions in the following order. You will play 1 card out of the 4 from your hand. Then, based on the card you played, you will put one of your pieces on the board in a space that corresponds with the number on the card played. And lastly, you'll replenish your hand by drawing an additional card off the top of the deck. The Pompeii cards contain 3 important pieces of information. The number on the card corresponds to one of the 11 buildings on the board. This is the building that you will place a piece into when you play a card on your turn. The color of the card corresponds to the color of a set of buildings on the board and will match the color of the specific building designated by the number. The symbols at the bottom of the card show both the number of cards in the deck with that number and the number of groupings of the available spaces within the corresponding buildings. All of the buildings on the board show the number of available spaces for the game pieces to be put into. The specific groups of spaces within a building becomes important later in the game. Another thing to note is that there are some neutral buildings throughout the board, which are a beige color with no number on them. We'll learn more about them later. Once the first 8 cards have been drawn off the top of the deck, the next player to draw to refill their hand will draw the first AD 79 card in the deck. They will discard this and immediately get a replacement card. From this point forward, there are some additional rules that must be observed. One of these new rules are omen cards. When you draw an omen card off the deck, you immediately put it on the discard pile. After that, you take another player's game piece out of a building of your choice and throw it into the volcano. This piece is now out of the game, then you draw a replacement card so that you have 4 cards in your hand again, and it becomes the next player's turn. If you draw another omen, you repeat the above until you draw a non-omen card as a replacement. Another new rule that must be followed now that Vesuvius has erupted is the relative rule. With this rule, whenever you add a piece to a building that already has pieces in it, whether they be your own or someone else's, you may optionally put additional pieces, relatives, in different buildings as part of the same move. Relatives can be placed in the buildings of the same color or neutral buildings. Since there are no Pompeii cards for the neutral buildings, they can only be filled by the means of the relative rule. For each game piece already in part of the building where you place your piece, so in this case 2 pieces, you place another of your pieces into either a different building of the same color, so we could put one over here since that's the same brown color building, or you could put another part of the same building if the building has multiple parts, which in this case the 10 building does have another part, so we could place one there. Or lastly, we could choose a neutral non-numbered building, so we could put it even here. You cannot, however, place relatives into the same part of a building as your original piece was placed in. You may place relatives into multiple different neutral buildings, but never multiple relatives into the same neutral building. When counting existing pieces to determine how many relatives you get, ignore the pieces that are in a different part of the same building. However, you may only put one relative into any given building in the same move. Putting relatives into buildings that already have game pieces in them does not re-trigger the relatives rule again. In other words, there are no chain reactions. It may happen that there are not enough free spaces for all relatives to move into. In that case, you cannot place the extra relatives. Another rule to be aware of is that if all the spaces within a building belonging to a number on a card are occupied, you may play the card as a wild card. You may put one of your pieces on any free space in any building regardless of the color of that building. However, pieces moved into building by the means of a wild card do not trigger the relatives rule. As an example, if we had these cards and wanted to play our 10, there are not currently any open spots in the 10 building, so we could place this as a wild and add a piece anywhere else on the board, but not re-trigger the relative rule. The first phase of the game end is triggered when the second AD 79 card is drawn to replenish a player's hand. In this case, all players will immediately put all of their cards on the discard pile. All game pieces left in front of the players are put back into the box. Do not throw them into the volcano, and do not count for or against players at the end of the game. Very rarely, if all the cards of a player's hand are for buildings that are already full, in other words, he has only wild cards in his hand, that player can call out, "The volcano erupts!" at any time, even if it's not his turn. He must then show his cards to the other players as proof. Then the lava will begin to flow. Every lava tile shows one of 6 different symbols that match up with a corresponding space on the board. So if we look at this one, we've got a blue symbol that matches this space on the board, so if we were to draw that tile, that would be the only place we could put it. However, from this point forward, we'll be able to add any of these blue icon tiles off of this original one. These lava tiles, drawn later, must be placed orthogonally adjacent next to a tile of the same symbol. The left-handed neighbor of the player who drew the AD 79 card, and thus triggered the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, draws the first lava tile from the bag without looking into it, and puts it on the first lava scare of the respective symbol. The other players follow clockwise, drawing and placing one lava tile each until there are 6 tiles on the board. If a player puts a lava tile onto a city square, regardless of whether it shows a whole building or only a half a building on which there are game pieces, these pieces are thrown into the volcano. Once there are 6 lava tiles on the game board, the second phase of the game begins. The left-hand neighbor of the player who put down the 6th tile begins the second phase. Now your turns consist of 2 steps. First, you will draw one lava tile from the bag and place it on the board, and then you'll move 2 of your game pieces. Like you did to set up the previous 6 lava tiles, you must draw the lava tile from the bag without looking into it. You then place it on the game board adjacent to the other tiles of the same symbol. Or like before, if it's the first tile of a certain symbol, it must go on that first starting lava space. And once again, if you put a lava tile into a city square on which there are game pieces, these are all thrown into the volcano, even if some of them are your own pieces. Another thing to watch is that you must throw game pieces into the volcano whenever they are blocked from exiting the city by lava tiles. Even in cases when the pieces can still move, remove pieces as soon as they are blocked or surrounded. After this tile has been placed, you may then move up to 2 of your pieces. Normally, you'll be moving 2 different pieces, however there are exceptions to this. The total number of pieces, regardless of color, in a square determines the maximum movement for each piece in the square. You may move your piece 1 city block for each piece in the square. You do not have to move the maximum. For instance, if it was the red player's turn, since there are 3 pieces in this square, he could choose to move his red piece 1, 2, 3 spaces and get out of the city. And for his other movement, even though he could move 2 spaces, since there's a secondary person in here, he could choose to just move this guy 1 space into that square. Another thing to note is, much like the lava tiles, you can move a game piece vertically or horizontally, but never diagonally. Changing direction is allowed, even more than once in the same move, but moving back and forth is not. You may move a game piece onto any city square except on squares with lava tiles and empty lava start squares. You may leave move points unused if you don't want to move as many squares as you could. Remember, there is no limit to the number of pieces that may be on a single square. The round space on the buildings have no meaning in the second phase of the game. If a game piece is moved out of a city passing through one of the gates, it is safe from the volcano, and you place the piece in front of yourself. Moving through a gate counts as moving 1 square, so it costs 1 move point to get outside. Each safe piece will count as a point at the end of the game. Usually a player must move 2 different game pieces on their turn. However, there are 2 exceptions to this rule. The first exception is, if you only have 1 game piece left in the city, you may use both of your moves to move that piece. If you have no game pieces left in that city, you only draw and place lava tiles on your turn. The second exception is, if a piece is alone in a square at the start of your turn, you may move that piece twice, instead of moving 2 different pieces. The first move will be 1 city block, but the total number of pieces in the new square will determine the second move. The game ends when you draw the last lava tile from the bag. If you do, finish your turn and the game ends. All game pieces remaining on the board are thrown into the volcano. The game can, however, end earlier if there are no game pieces left in the city, or if no piece can be moved out of the city because all gates or the ways to the gates have been made impossible by lava tiles. If you save the most game pieces from the volcano, you win the game. If there's a tie, the tied players with the fewest pieces in the volcano win. I hope that gave you a little better idea of how to play the Downfall of Pompeii. If you have any further questions about how to play, please leave a comment below. Otherwise, thank you for watching and keep on nibbling.